Okay, hi, and this will be an introduction into restoration and retouching. I'm going to start with some of the basics in restoration, and through that introduce some of the tools that will be used for restoration but also for retouching. So this is a way to get into some of the tools that are used in that context. So we have a file here which has low contrast. If you look at the histogram, there's no blacks, which would be over here, and there's no whites, which would be over here. So the first thing to do is to change the distribution of tones so that we end up with full black and full white, or as close as much greater distribution than we have now. One of the best ways to do that is to come down and add a levels adjustment layer. So at the bottom of the layers palette, right down here at the bottom, choose levels, and that gives us a dialog box here. I'm going to open this up a little bit so that the histogram is more visible. The sliders give us an indication of where to begin to place the tones. So this slider over here on the left is the black point slider. Also on this side there's the white point slider. There's other indicators here. The eyedroppers can also help in being able to use the levels adjustment layer. However, I find that it's just as easy to use the sliders. So if I grab the black point and move it over, what's happening here is that these tones, these are the middle tones that are the darkest tones, and that's reflected in the histogram itself. The histogram is simply a diagram of the pixels as they're distributed in the image. So that's why we can say there's no contrast, because all the pixels are here in the middle range that's reflected right down here in the gradient. So what's happening is that we're taking the darkest gray pixels, because there's nothing black, and basically remapping them. So you can almost think of a line connecting these two right here, where we're going to take these pixels here and we're going to push them to black. Likewise here with the white point, slide that over, and these pixels here, which are not pure white, are now being remapped to pure white, and now you can see that the distribution of tones is a lot better, and we have basically a full set of black to white settings. Because we've used a adjustment layer here, it's non-destructive. We've done nothing to the underlying file, and yet it makes a big difference to the overall file. Once we do that basic tonal adjustment, one of the best tools that is used when you're working through a retouching project, or in this case a restoration project, is to make what I refer to as a work in progress layer. And that is by pressing Shift, Option, Command, and then you press those keys down all at the same time, and then you press the E key. And what that will do is it will copy whatever is visible and put it on a new layer. So it's making a new layer from whatever you see on the screen, and I call this a work in progress layer, so I'll call this WIP, and it will give me an idea. It just basically gives me a starting point. One of the other things that's a good thing to do is to get organized as far as your layers are concerned. So I'm going to double click on the background. I'm going to call this source, so I know that this is the original file. And then for the levels adjustment, I'm going to shift click, highlight both of those layers, and then do Command G, and this I'll just simply tone null control, or you could put in levels or something like that. That would help you identify. Now when you click the arrow, that will open that up, and you can see that everything is inside that grouping. Now to get started doing some repair to this file, I'm going to press Command 1. That will zoom in. Command 1 is a good shortcut for zooming in. It'll take us to 100%, and that's reflected right down here in the corner. That shows you the magnification of the window that you're working with. Command 0 is a good shortcut key, because what will happen is it will zoom out the image to fill in the area of the window. So whatever size your window is, it will zoom it out and fill the frame. When you're doing retouching and restoration, it's a really good idea to be working at 100%, just to be clear that you're not going to miss anything. So I'm going to press Command 1 here to zoom right in. And the first tool I'm going to work with will be a spot healing brush, but in order to work this non-destructively, I'll come back here to the layers palette, highlight the top layer, and then add an empty layer right here. And you can see that it's clear because it has the checkerboard, so it is a transparent layer. And I'm doing this so once again the editing will be non-destructive. Coming over here to the toolbar, I'm going to click on what's referred to as the spot healing brush. You can see the tooltip pop up there. Shortcut letter to get to that tool is J, or Shift J will take you through the tool set that's right here. You can see we have spot healing brush tool, patch tool, content aware move tool, and a red eye tool. All of these are important tools for use in retouching. So I'll go back, I'll choose the spot healing brush. Now another set of shortcut keys which is extremely valuable. Let's take a look at, you can see the cursor here is a circle, and that reflects the size of the brush, or in this case it's the spot healing brush, and you can change the size of the brush by pressing the bracket key. I'm pressing the right bracket key to make it bigger, or the left bracket key to make it smaller. You can also come up here to the options bar, click on the icon for the tool itself, and you can set the size here. The problem with that is that you can't really see it interactively until you bring the cursor back in. You can see now it's a lot bigger. If I slide this up, it makes it even bigger still. I just find that yes, it is there, but I like to see what I'm doing on the screen interactively. A much better way, and this is a fairly recent addition to Photoshop, is to press the Control and Option keys. I'm on a Mac keyboard, so it would be perhaps Command or Control and Alt on a PC. In any case, on the Mac, it's on the outer keys on the keyboard, and if I press those keys down and then left click on my mouse button, we can see that there is a dialog box that shows the diameter, the hardness, and the opacity of the brush. If I slide the mouse left and right, it actually makes it bigger and smaller, so it's very interactive. Still pressing those two keys down, if I slide the mouse up and down, so vertically and horizontally, up and down vertically, it changes the whoops, I have made it too small. So if I slide the mouse up, it makes the edge of the brush softer, and you can see that in the red overlay, and as I slide it back down, it makes the brush harder. One of the things which is important when you're doing retouching, however, it's not true with this tool. Using the spot healing brush, you should always keep it at maximum hardness, and the reason for that is because the tool itself has a built-in soft edge, so adding softness to that tool is not a recommended practice. What is a good idea to do here with using the spot healing brush is to work with just dabbing, and but before I do any of that, one thing which is important is to check the settings of your particular tool. In this case, the spot healing brush. In the options bar across the top, there's content aware, there's create texture, there's proximity match. The default is content aware, and that's probably a good place to start. Very important to follow the philosophy of non-destructive editing is to make sure that this checkbox here that says sample all layers, make sure that's turned on. Now that's going to work when you're working with an empty layer. Now it's also important to make sure that this layer is highlighted. One of the mistakes students often make is they don't have the right layer highlighted, and so things get messed up. What I want to do is I want to do my retouching, but do the retouching elements. What'll happen is it'll place the retouched elements onto a separate layer. You'll see this in a minute. It's easier to show you than to talk about it. So I'll come back in here, and I'm just going to dab. And as you can see, it's getting red. I'll zoom in a bit more here just so you can have a sense of what's going on. Just dab on this, and as I dab that, it heals the spot. I'm going to zoom back out again here, pressing Z and Option at the same time. And you just dab. Now you can paint with this. You can paint like that, but I find that that's not a good practice, especially when you're just dealing with spots. What it can do is it can sometimes make it fuzzy. So I'm just going to very quickly do some cleaning up here. And just dab, dab, dab. There's some other spots down here that are somewhat problematic down here as well. Press the space bar to move this around. Here's some rather worse, and I'm just, as I say, just dab, dab. When you're doing retouching or restoration, it's not a good idea to try to do it all at once. Take your time. Don't try to do everything with just one brush stroke. Little brush strokes at one time is going to give you much better results than trying to speed on. And I'm also trying to mix this as I go through it. Sometimes the healing brush will not. It'll take some multiple strokes to make it work. And the content aware setting is what is, allowing the blending to work really well here. Okay, so what's happened is that by highlighting this layer here, I'm going to call this spotting. Oops. And if I turn this layer off and on, you can see that the original file has been left alone. Yes, the damage is still there, but it's a good way to, if you make a mistake, you haven't done anything to the original file. So turn this back on again, get this all cleaned up a little bit more. Okay, well, I'm not going to do the whole thing right now, but you get the idea. Once I've done that and I have the the retouching that I want, I'll basically do Command 0 to zoom out, and then we can see before and after. There's some spots that I've cleaned up there. If I shift click and highlight both of those layers, then do Command E, what that does is it flattens the layer. So in your workflow, it's a good idea to start out non-destructively, but then to save yourself having a whole bunch of layers, then just collapse them down, merge the layers, and you can still, if you open this up, I'm going to press the Option key. You can still see, I'm pressing Option while I click on the visibility icon, I can see it before and after, so you can really get a good idea of the kind of thing that you're doing here. Okay, I'm going to move on to another file here. Let's move over here to this file. It's also very flat, so first thing I'll do is add a levels adjustment layer. Slide the black point over, slide the white point over, and now I have elements I can work with. Zoom in on this, and you can begin to see that there's a lot of little scratches and dust spots and stuff like that here. Before I go any further with this, I'm going to do a work in progress layer. Shift Option Command E, put that on its own layer. And let's talk about another tool here. I'll collapse these down, call this source. And collapse those down. Call that source as well, so I know it's that's the starting point. I'll add a empty layer on top here. And rather than use the spot healing brush, the next tool I'm going to use is the healing brush tool. Now, the healing brush tool is a little bit different. Now, if we look in the options bar once again, there's different settings. Every time you change the tool, you have to pay attention to the options bar because things are going to change. With this drop down here, this gives us some blend mode. Sometimes that's useful. In this case, we have a sampled source. We don't need to turn on aligned. We do need sample all layers turned on though, because we're going to use an empty layer here. And what this brush requires is we need to pull information from. Now what this tool will do is it will actually combine a source area with the destination area. And what is done with this is you press the Option key to target a specific area, so the pixels from this area will get moved over here. So this is the target, it's called the source. Click once on that, then release the Option key, and then again I'm just dabbing, and you can see the crosshair. Every time I dab, the crosshair is always going back to the original place. Now it's creating a bit of a pattern here. So if you turn on aligned, let me undo all that stuff first. I'm going backwards in Option Command Z to get me back to where I was. If I turn on aligned now with this tool, and if I click right here and dab, oops, I'm now messing that up, my source file. I went back too far. So let me go back to this, regroup that. I'll just add another layer on top here and get going with that. Here's aligned. I will Option click and then dab. And the relative position of the source and the target are moving. You can see that if I paint with this, you can see that crosshair is moving relative to between the source and the destination. So I'm going to click on the source here, move over, and then just paint away. And what the brush is doing is that it actually, I'm pressing Option. When you're working with this tool, as well as working with the clone stamp tool, that is another tool that requires a source and a destination, it's a good idea to be constantly sampling different source areas. You don't want to create patterns that will end up repeating. Once I get to working with the clone stamp tool, you'll see what I mean, because it can create some rather obvious Photoshop. It's one of the things that people can see, that it's an obvious Photoshop job. Now in this case, this is probably not the best tool to use. I would tend to go back and use the spot healing brush tool, sample all layers, and really just go back and dab and dab and dab, get rid of these spots. And it doesn't take much time, but it's not a good idea, as I say, to paint like that. It's a good idea just to dab and get rid of those distracting elements. So once again, if I turn the top layer off and on, you can see how rather quickly we've cleaned that up and we've gotten rid of some of the distracting elements. Okay, let's move along to working with filling in some areas. This file right here, I want to fill in the corners. We're going to use a combination of tools. The one thing about restoration and retouching is that it's a really good idea to get a handle on all these different tools, because some of them are appropriate at certain times and some are appropriate at other times. You'll usually use a mixture of tools, not just one tool. Not one tool is going to do everything, so you really have to get familiar with all of them. I'm going to double click the background layer to unlock it and create a copy of this layer, Command J. And the reason I do that is because what I'm going to be needing to do with this file will not work with sample all layers, which so you'll see that in a minute. First thing I will do though is I'm going to clean up some of the tearing and some of the creases in this by creating a brand new layer here, an empty layer. I'll come in with the spot healing brush first. Again, sample all layers is turned on, and I'm just going to dab here. And clean some of this up. Now, there may be times for this kind of situation where I'm kind of creating a little bit of more of a softer edge here, and I can see some of these patterns are repeating. So I'm going to undo some of this. That's with the spot healing brush. And come back with the healing brush tool. And now I'm going to choose a source and then come over and dab over here. And I change the source. And it's really important to just mix it up so that you don't end up with these kind of repeating patterns. And you should see in the video when I'm pressing the keystrokes, because I set the video so you know when I'm pressing a key. So that might help you to see when. And I'm just coming in over here. And it's a good idea when especially you're choosing a source, so you can see here, this is a dark area. Choose that source, click to set the source, and then come down so that you're kind of matching the edges. This will be much more important when we're working with the clone stamp tool. And I'll do this one here too. And break this up. I find doing retouching and restoration actually quite addictive. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. And so back to the spot healing brush here. It's kind of getting messed up, so I'll undo this. I'm going to zoom in on her foot here and making my spot healing brush smaller. Come in and dab. Make this bigger. So often the kinds of things that you need to work with are, sometimes it's important to zoom in or zoom out. That could be a bit better, but and I'll come back here to the healing brush tool, make that a little bit larger, press the source and paint that in. And you can see there's a pattern right in here where that leaf repeats, and that's the kind of thing you really want to avoid with doing any of this. So what I tend to do is I'll come over here and just grab a part here, and then again just dab, and now I've gotten rid of that repeating pattern, and so it fools the eye into where stuff is. Now here's an example of some of the problems that can happen when you're using some of the healing brushes. You can see how this is really a soft, I'll zoom in on this here. You can see how this is really kind of a blob. It's not really defined, sharply defined. So I'm going to zoom out here on this, and instead of using the either the spot healing brush or the healing brush tool, I'm going to come down here and use the clone stamp tool. So if I click on the clone stamp tool, the main thing I want to see here is, again, here are blend modes. I don't want to work with any of those. Make sure that, again, sample all layers right here is turned on, otherwise it's not going to transfer to the active layer. Again, check to make sure your layer is active. Now I'm going to again go back to clone stamp, press the option key to pick up a source, and now I'm just dabbing, and I come over here and I mix it up, and you can see that now that bush is no longer soft. It's not like a blur. It's more sharply defined. So this is an example of where the clone stamp tool might be a better tool to use. And again, I just dab, and you can see with the keystrokes I'm picking up areas. If I just do this, you can see here's how that pattern repeats. So that's not a good thing. I'll undo that. So by dabbing, picking up over here, dabbing here, picking up over here, you can see that I'm not repeating the pattern, and that's something that you want to avoid. Okay, so I'll just very quickly clean that one up. Okay, I'll zoom out and we'll see the whole image. Before I go any further with this, I'm going to take the retouching that I've done. Here's before and after. And I'm going to collapse this into one layer. So highlight both layers, Command E, and now I'm back onto, I've basically cleaned up everything and everything's on its own layer. The next thing I want to do here is I want to fill in some of these blank areas where there's torn spaces, and I'm going to do that by making a selection using the quick select tool right here and coming in and just picking the lighter areas. I don't want to go all the way inside the image area here. If I make a mistake and I come in like this, the way to remove that is to press Option, so you get a minus in the middle. And I'm just going to paint in a way here, and it will remove the area that I don't want. So now I've made this selection, the white area, and I'm going to use what's called content aware fill to fill this area in. But before I do so, I need to make sure I have to expand the selection so that the dancing ants are actually a little bit inside the image area right here. Photoshop needs that in order to be able to do the proper content aware fill. So coming up here to the select menu, I'll choose modify and expand, and I will expand by 10 pixels. Click OK, and you can see it actually took it outside. That was what that bounds checkbox was. Now that I've expanded this selection a bit, and sometimes the content aware fill will work, sometimes it won't, sometimes it'll do weird things, but it's a very quick way to fill in blank areas or areas that you want to quickly fill in, and then you can come in with other tools and clean them up. We'll see what happens here. So I'll go to the edit menu, choose fill, and now under contents, I want to choose content aware, so make sure that top one is checked off. I'm going to leave everything else the same, not going to do anything with it right now. Click OK. And yeah, and if I still have the dancing ants there, I want to get rid of them, so Command D. And that's looking pretty good. There's, what I check for now is I'm looking for repeating patterns. There's a little bit of stuff right in here that it's a little bit blurry, so I'm going to add another empty layer. Come back over here with probably the clone stamp tool might be best. Press Option and start dabbing in some of that there. Clone stamp tool will copy exactly what it sees, so, and we're just fooling the eye. Stuff when you do this work, you may know where the flaws are, but trust me, most people won't even see it. So that's a great way to kind of fill that in, and I'll just collapse that down with this layer underneath it. Command E, and now we can see before and after, and we've really made a big difference to that file.